All right, welcome back to the Mike Farrell Sports Show. I am not Mike Farrell. My name is Adam Eaton, and I'm joined by Mike Farrell, the godfather of recruiting. We have embarked on this new endeavor. He's been kind enough to let me hone in on what he's working on. So, first off, Mike, thanks for the nice welcome to the Mike Farrell Sports family. Excited about getting rolling with you.
Yeah, it's fun, and as you can see, it's going to be as professional as I am. Dirty hat, no backdrop, Gatorade in the background, bubbly. Just looking for sponsors, so maybe Gatorade or Bubbly will hit me up here. But I want it to be no frills, just sports talk, just guys talking.
Well, we have fancy graphics behind you, so maybe we can. That'll help the audience a little bit. And you've got a ping hat on. I hear the tour is not doing so well. Maybe they'll need some sponsorship, Mike. But people aren't here for our golf talk. I don't think. Maybe we'll come back to that later. People want football talk, and probably the biggest name right now in the recruiting circuit is none other than Arch Manning. Obviously, everyone knows Arch Manning, a legacy name. Everyone knows his family. He's been on the tour of late and bouncing around schools. Like, what are you hearing on the latest? I know he was at Georgia, spent some time at Bama, but he's got Texas coming up. Where are we at with Arch Manning these days?
So the Georgia visit went very well, and I got a lot of information out of that visit, and the presentation that Kirby and Todd Monken made to him as far as his progression as a Georgia Bulldog, and how he fits in the depth chart. Alabama's been super quiet. Haven't heard a lot about it. I've heard that it went well. I've heard that the pitch was similar to what you'd expect from a Nick Saban. We took Eli Holstein in this class. He's a 4-star kid. You're going to come in as one of two quarterbacks. Obviously, you're going to be given an opportunity to compete and start. Bryce Young's going to be going off to the NFL, and if you want to win national titles and be a first-round draft pick, this is the place to come. That's more the Alabama approach to recruiting. It's like, we'll win with you, we'll win without you. We'd rather win with you. And then Texas is this upcoming weekend, and that's a big one because, Texas and his relationship with Steve Sarkisian, his love of Austin, the city, his want to be, I guess, in a college town and not a spectacle. Is important to him, and Texas has been the most comfortable school for him so far. So, right now, I think if he had to pick, he would pick UGA. But I think Texas has the chance here with the last visit, and they're in the driver's seat. They just can't screw it up, and they have to win football games this season because I'm sure he's going to be looking at that.
What about you mentioned Sark? Is he kind of a wild card in this process, right? Obviously, he's a pretty big name coach, charismatic guy. What about his connection with coaches? Do you think that Sark connection is enough to break him from UGA and the lure of the overlord that is Nick Saban? I mean, is Sark that charismatic that you think he could sell Arch?
He can. He has a good relationship with the family. Obviously they're from Louisiana. Texas is closer to home. It's not what he did at Texas that he's selling. It's what he did at Alabama. He was obviously involved in the development of two quarterbacks that went in the first round. And, especially the Mac Jones development, I think was especially impressive because that was a kid who waited his turn. A lot of people discounted him as a guy who could get it done. And he really went above and beyond, and he had a very good rookie season. So that's what he's selling. Saban is hard to beat in recruiting. But the problem they have there is Jalen Milroe is extremely talented. And weirdly enough, Alabama plays Ole Miss every season. And I know you're going to say that's stupid. It's crazy. Why would that even impact? It comes up every time I talk to anybody. There's an Ole Miss connection. Georgia got hurt by Matt Luke leaving. Matt Luke used to be the head coach at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is out because Lane Kiffin was the coach at Tennessee, and he left in the middle of the night. And Peyton still holds that dear to his heart and the way things ended there. And I don't think they believe Lane Kiffin's going to stay there. So the Ole Miss factor is there, that he's not going to go there. But Alabama playing Ole Miss every year is not good for Alabama, believe it or not. It's better that Georgia is a sort of a cross-divisional foe. But Texas being out of the SEC, they'll be in 2025. You don't know where they're going to be plugged in or who the rival's going to be and all that stuff. There's a lot of unknowns. So if I had to rate the coaches, Sark would probably be first. when it comes to the relationship with the family over Saban and Kirby Smart. Because remember, those guys are defensive coaches as well.
Is there anything I mean, Georgia, unfortunately, haven't developed a ton of NFL caliber quarterbacks in the last couple of years under Kirby Smart. Is that a knock on them? Is that something you think Arch and the Mannings are looking at, saying, well, Alabama, you've got Bill O'Brien, right? You've got NFL caliber. You just mentioned what you have in Sark and what he did. Georgia, who's the guy they point to and go, hey, look, we did this with this guy. Who's that guy for them?
They don't really have one. I mean, obviously, the whole Justin Fields situation was mishandled. They still won a national championship. And believe it or not, the guy they're pointing to is Stetson Bennett in a way. Now, Stetson Bennett does not have the talent of an Arch Manning. He was a walk-on kid, went to JUCO, came back. But, he won the job. He ended up beating out Brock Vandagriff, who's a five-star quarterback, who's still on the roster and is, going to be one of the guys that Arch would be competing with. They've got Gunnar Stockton, Carson Beck, other highly rated quarterbacks. But Todd Monken and the job that he did with Stetson Bennett, I think, is going to be what the focus is and the selling point there. But they had Jacob Eason, five-star quarterback. He transferred out when Jake Fromm beat him, five-star quarterback. Jake Fromm held off Justin Fields, five-star quarterback. So when you look at all of that, Eason went off to Washington, didn't do that great. Fromm ended up being a mid-round pick, didn't do that great, and wasn't an NFL guy as far as development. And Justin Fields went off to Ohio State, and he became a first-round pick. So mismanagement is there, and I think they're trying to overcome that with, well, we can do it with anybody. Imagine your skill set if we did this with Stetson Bennett.
Do we have any sense for how much family influence, how much any of the illustrious Mannings are involved in this, or is that Arch's kind of confidant group right now as he's kind of weighing this decision?
Well, Cooper's the big key here. Cooper, obviously, Arch's mom and dad are the keys here. Cooper is the least known Manning, and he was an athletic wide receiver who went to Ole Miss and had, diagnosed with spinal stenosis, ended his career. And everybody loves to say he's the most athletic of the Mannings, and he probably is. Archie,
it's not hard.
Archie is the patriarch. He's not going to be involved. He's the grandfather, and that's fine. But I don't think he's overly involved. And Peyton and Eli are involved from hey, this is the decisions we made. This is what you're going to deal with in college. And this is, how you deal with being a highly touted quarterback and, number one overall pick in the draft if you get to that point. So, but I think this decision comes down to Arch and his parents, really as to what fit. And again, it goes back to he's such a big name. He doesn't like the attention. He put up a Twitter account by protest. I don't think he still tweeted. NIL doesn't matter because they've got money and it's not one of those situations. And this is really about him trying to have as normal experience for 3 years at a college as he possibly can as a quarterback named Manning.
What's the timeline, you think, for his decision? Do you think, obviously, as Texas coming up, do you think he takes the next year? Or you think he does something before the season starts? Do you have any sense for the timeline and when he's looking to make an announcement?
I think if he's going to choose, UGA or Alabama, I think he'll do it at the end of this month. I think Texas is the interesting one because, if he commits to Texas. So here's the two sides of things. He wants to get into a class early enough where he can impact the talent coming to the class. Arch Manning commits to a school, wide receivers, offensive linemen, running backs, even defensive players are going to be interested more so in that school than they would be before because he's a talent and a big name. So that's important, but he also doesn't want to be a kid who decommits, from what I've heard. The Mannings have a tremendous reputation as far as, character is concerned. And they feel, I believe it would be sort of a blight on his resume if he committed to a Texas and then they went out and got destroyed by Alabama and Oklahoma and Sark's on the hot seat and he has to decommit and go someplace else. So that's also a factor here. I think if he waits, I think Texas is in the driver's seat. And I think they're the team that he's just watching to see how they start the season. And if he commits to Texas in June, that would be very, very interesting to me because that means he doesn't care how the start goes, but he does care if Sark's going to be there. So I think he's going to wait a little bit, not too long. I think he's going to be a summer decision. I think he's going to recruit for his class and use that name to help bolster the talent and the roster from the recruiting class in 2023. But that is a very, very good question, the timeline, because they don't have one.
Right.
It could have ended any time, and it could continue right up until the early signing period in December.
Do you see any dark horse schools coming out of left field, 11th hour, making a pitch that you would give any sort of credence to, hey, they may have a shot to get in his ear?
Nah, I don't. Obviously other schools like Florida and LSU have been mentioned with their new head coaches. And, he likes Brian Kelly, even though he's not known as a great quarterback developer. He likes Billy Napier, even though he's never really coached at that Power 5 level as a head coach. Ole Miss is the one that is always in there. Clemson, he visited, he liked Dabo, but he didn't really, from what I understand, like the city. It wasn't enough for him. He wants a small college town, but he wants a small college town that has a lot to do, which was why I think also Athens and Austin are probably the two favorites for him when it comes to towns. No, Ole Miss, I just don't see how that happens. It may be stupid to a lot of people, but it's very smart to the Mannings. They love Ole Miss. Ole Miss is in their family. Cooper, Eli, Archie. But it's not just that Kiffin left in the middle of the night at Tennessee, but it's like, will he leave again? And there's just so many rumors about him being involved in other jobs last year and job openings last year that I don't think they could project that he's going to be there for 3 years.
Mike, that would be so much fun. The storylines each week having him and Ole Miss, it would be so much fun for guys like you and I to talk about every week.
And Kiffin, Kiffin's fun. I would love to see Arch go to Ole Miss. I would absolutely love it. UGA's, that's fine. They've won a national championship. Alabama, that's fine. They've won a national championship. Texas is interesting, but they got Quinn Ewers. We can follow his 5-star #1 recruit journey, right? Ole Miss,
sure,
have that. Let's go to Ole Miss and keep the legacy going and see what happens with him and Kiffin, because I think it'd be a great combination. But I think this is a situation where it's going to come down to Arch and his parents, but everybody kind of has to stamp off on this, and not everybody is.
I saw on Twitter today, Eli was at Gainesville talking around with Tim Tebow. Now, he could be doing that ESPN show Eli does where he goes to college places. Maybe he's doing some recon. Maybe they call Tebow in 11th hour to make a call to Arch. Possibility?
I don't think so. It is funny because Peyton was at a golf tournament in Oklahoma last weekend when Oklahoma was having their big barbecue or whatever. People thought that he was skipping out on his Alabama visit to go to Oklahoma. And no, there's so many rumors. There's great rumors. But I really think that this family has really narrowed down their choices. They've done a good job of doing that. And a lot of people are critical of him because, just commit already. But I think they've handled this well. And I think he's been leaning towards certain schools at certain different times. Texas at one point. Then when Quinn Ewers transferred, Texas sort of fell off. Georgia at one point. Then when they flirted with Caleb Williams in the transfer portal, they fell off a little bit. I think they're just holding their water and being smart about this. So for another school to get involved this late would really, really surprise me, even if a Tim Tebow picked up the phone and said, hey, come to Gainesville.
All right, well, as much as you like Arch Manning, Mike, you are not one who is shy about getting out there with an opinion. And as much as Arch is great, he's not your #1 quarterback. You feel really strong about Malachi Nelson as your #1. Tell us, A, are you okay? You feeling all right? And B, what leads you to that conclusion that Malachi Nelson is better than the all-world Arch Manning?
So Arch Manning, 6'4", 215. He's very filled out. He doesn't look that big in pictures, but he is physically he's not fully filled out, but he's a big quarterback and he's athletic and he can move and he's got the name Manning and, all the intangibles, and he's been coached up by Mannings forever, right? Malachi Nelson's ceiling hasn't been reached yet or even close to it. I think we might be close to Arch Manning's ceiling, as stupid as that sounds, because that would be like saying, well, Peyton's ceiling was reached as a freshman at Tennessee or Eli's was reached early at Ole Miss. It doesn't make sense with the Mannings to say that, but Malachi Nelson, 6'3", he's listed 175. Now, just this past weekend, he was in a 7-on-7 tournament, and he looks much thicker. He's added pounds. I think he's probably 195 by now. I think he could play at 210. He's not the biggest or thickest quarterback in the world, but man, is he fluid. Everything he does is just so fluid that when I watch him, I really have trouble finding faults. And when I watch Arch, especially sometimes with the field vision and downfield and, going through progressions, which are the things you'd think a Manning would have, he still struggles with that. He doesn't play great competition there. Not that Loisal out in California is the best, but I just think the way Malachi Nelson is built, the way he's sort of headed towards his projection and his ceiling. And listen, the fit at USC under Lincoln Riley is a great one. Absolutely great. Caleb will be there for this year and next. Malachi Nelson will walk in there and he'll put up monster numbers and he'll be a potential number 1 overall pick. Now, in the draft, if you got a choice between a Malachi Nelson and an Arch Manning, NFL teams might take the guy with the name Manning. But I really like his upside is just it's off the charts. He's so fluid in everything from footwork to release to mechanics. I have trouble finding flaws, and that doesn't mean he's the best quarterback I've seen, ever since Trevor Lawrence or whatever. He's good at everything, and Arch has some flaws that are probably overlooked because the last name Manning.
I was going to ask that. I mean, how much does Malachi Nelson not being called Malachi Manning help him, right? To get a chance to flow under the radar and sort of surprise some people, right? Because a lot of eyes are obviously pointed in Archer's direction. And
he's committed too. I mean, that's the thing. Malachi was committed to Oklahoma, then Lincoln Riley switched to USC, and then he's going to USC. He's done. There's no drama. If he takes any visits, I don't think it's going to matter. Whereas Arch is in the news every day. If Arch sneezes, there's a report about it. And I think the hype around Arch just swallows everybody else. And Malachi Nelson, listen, he's my number 1 player in the country. My number 2 player is Arch Manning. So it's not like there's a big difference. But I've got 2 quarterbacks at the top in 2023, and I've got Malachi ahead of Arch.
Yeah, interesting to see how his USC journey goes, right? I mean, you mentioned obviously he's going to sit for a little bit. Will he be okay with that? I mean, obviously I assume Arch wants to play right away, and wherever he goes, will Malachi be all right sitting, you think, as Caleb sort of takes the reins and reruns that Lincoln Riley offense out west?
I think so. I mean, I think he knows what he's getting into. There's no surprises. Arch Manning doesn't know what he's getting into at Georgia because, Bennett's been there for 15 years, so he's going to be gone. How good is Vandegrift? How good is Gunnar Stockton? How good is Carson Beck? Who am I? There's a lot of unknowns there. Texas, we haven't seen Quinn Ewers play yet, so we don't know how good he is. So there's question marks there. And at Alabama, Jalen Milroe is the backup, and he's awesome. They got Ty Simpson and, obviously Eli Holstein in this class. I think Malachi Nelson knows what he's getting at USC. He knows Caleb Williams, the guy this year. He knows Caleb Williams, the guy the following year. He can learn under him, and I don't think he's going to be impatient. I think if there was an issue, it would have come up by now with Caleb Williams making the spring decision to go to USC. Malachi Nelson might have flipped out and said, I'm going someplace else. And DJ Petway, who's a very, very, very talented 5-star quarterback from Texas, loves USC as well. And he's a 2024 kid. I don't think Malachi Nelson cares. I like his demeanor. I like his confidence. I like everything about him. I don't think he cares. And I think he's just going to go out there and he's going to be as good as he wants to be. And I think what's exciting here is these Pac-12 quarterbacks, at UCLA and USC. We haven't seen a lot of those guys recently. Josh Rosen and Sam Darnold were first rounders a few years ago, but we've had the Slovises and the JT Daniels and guys like that transfer out. We've had Dorian Thompson-Robinson be at UCLA for a few years and sort of level out. We're going to start seeing finally, and it seems like it's been ages. It's only been 5 or 6 years, but we're going to start seeing USC quarterbacks and probably UCLA quarterbacks really start to shine on a national level, Heisman-wise, NFL draft-wise, and I think that's what's needed for the Pac-12.
Yeah, I mean, Chip and Lincoln both out there running offenses in LA. That's got to be a a quarterback festival out there. I mean, there's got to be kids who are going to be, knocking on their doors trying to get involved. Whereas to your point in the past, those kids went to Clemson, those kids went to Georgia. Now it opens up that Western pipeline. That's got to be, from a recruiting standpoint, are you seeing that impact already? Are you seeing the Lincoln Riley gravitational pull already sort of making some moves out west?
Yeah, last year they could have, filled that class. They could have filled that class late. They had everybody, wanting to commit. And I'm not talking about guys that, early signing period kids were signed and done. But a lot of the later kids, the 15% that were still left were very interested in USC. But also a lot of the talented kids in the 2023 class wanted to commit early. And from what I was told and from good sources, Riley held off. So they ended up with, not a big class last year. They've got 9 commits this year. They're going very slow. Last year was 10 commitments. They could load up their class tomorrow because there's so many kids lining up to play. But he's being picky about it. He's going to be smart about it. He's kind of being Pete Carroll about it because he's going to recruit nationally as well. And, we all saw what Pete Carroll did when he recruited nationally. So USC is as hot as any program in the country when it comes to recruiting right now. That offer means something. Back in the day, when you got a USC offer in the mid-2000s, it was a huge, huge, huge deal. And since then, it hasn't been. But now, if you get that USC offer, all of a sudden, it's a big deal again.
Yeah, I mean, Trojan fans would love to hear you talking about the Pete Carroll days, right? I think that'll be a welcome change for the folks in the West. But let's stay in the quarterback room for a second. What's going on in Michigan? I know, obviously, they're in the mix for a few different guys. I know that's a situation you're monitoring closely. What's going on with the QB situation with the Michigan Wolverines?
Well, so obviously you had CJ Carr, a 5-star kid from Michigan, who's the grandson of Lloyd Carr, committed to Notre Dame. And then Michigan fans lost their mind. I was talking to Rick Neuheisel earlier today on Full Ride Radio on Sirius. And, he and I talked off air and on air. And both of us had this suspicion that comes with being in college football for 25, 30 years that Michigan didn't really want him. He wasn't their top guy, right? Because had they wanted him, I think there's no way CJ Carr goes to Notre Dame. I think there's no way Lloyd Carr is wearing a Notre Dame hat on a Saline High School campus or on a Michigan campus or anywhere. Being okay with a legacy going to Notre Dame. Dante Moore is a 5-star quarterback from MLK in Michigan. He's higher on their list. 2024 is Carr's year. He's a 2024 quarterback. I think personally, they've got a couple other guys that they like better. And I think they feel they have a better chance of being a little bit more athletic and a little bit more dangerous with guys like Jaden Davis from Charlotte Providence Day, who's a smaller quarterback but can move. He's a lean towards Michigan right now. Julian Sayin from Carlsbad, California, 5-star kid that Michigan's recruiting heavily. So this was one of those things where it's like we have to offer and recruit a kid named Carr, who's the grandson of Lloyd, who's a great player, who's got 40 offers, who everybody wants, but that doesn't mean he's number 1 on our board. I think he was like 4 or 5. So Michigan fans that are freaking out, listen, on paper, it looks bad. A legacy, and everybody's saying, okay, Harbaugh doing interviews on signing day with the NFL, it's not good, blah, blah, blah. It's not as bad as you think. Now, if they lose Dante Moore to Notre Dame or somebody else, then it's bad.
Yeah, what's the smoke with Dante Moore? I saw obviously, his name is still in the Notre Dame circles as well. Any projection on where he's leaning or kind of where he's at right now? Because to your point, Michigan would probably freak out if that doesn't work out. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of people feel with the CJ Carr commitment that Michigan is now in the driver's seat, sort of. He's going to take his time. He's a very confident kid, almost to the border of cocky, which I like. I think Michigan's probably the leader for him. MLK is a program that's been good to Michigan State and Michigan over the years. But Notre Dame is not giving up. Notre Dame is still in there. CJ Carr doesn't care if Dante Moore commits in the 2023 class, and Dante Moore doesn't care if CJ Carr's in that 2024 class. So Michigan's in the driver's seat there, but it's still very iffy as to where he's going to go.
Well, we talked about Notre Dame. Let's transition there. I mean, wake up the Echoes. They're doing a fantastic job. Marcus Freeman in year one, certainly his step on recruiting. What do you like so far about what you've seen about Notre Dame's recruiting class, and how much better do you think it could get? I know there's some names floating out there, right? Some crystal ball type stuff. How much better do you think it could get as this summer continues to go on?
Yeah, it's really, really good. And to have 15 commitments in June for Notre Dame to me is a little surprising. Now we're in a day and age where you recruit ahead and you have to have half of your class, committed by June and then 75% of your class by August. So I get that. But with the academic restrictions, usually a lot of these kids that they target are academic kids who will either know they want to go to Notre Dame or wait it out and try to take a ton of visits and make a smart decision. So to get 15 kids on board, including, to me, 1 5-star and everybody else in this class is a 4-star kid. It just shows Marcus Freeman gets it. He knows how to recruit. He relates to players. He was a kid that I covered in high school, so he's been around recently through the recruiting process. And he understands, the pressure that these kids are under. So it's one of those things where it's a very, very strong early class. To keep it together will be interesting because they have to be successful. And that Ohio State game, the first week of the season, I mean, if they get blasted, they could lose a couple guys. But it's the best start I've seen for Notre Dame since I've been doing this. And that says something because Notre Dame recruiting is always top 10.
Does that say more about Marcus Freeman or more about Brian Kelly?
I think more about Marcus Freeman. Brian Kelly put together some great classes. Brian Kelly went to the national championship game. Brian Kelly went to the playoff. Brian Kelly is the bar, right? He's the all-time winningest coach there, blah, blah, blah. Marcus Freeman has yet to live up to that, of course, because he hasn't had an opportunity on the field. Recruiting-wise, I just think he relates a little bit better. And you got to remember, Brian Kelly, even though it wasn't as public as Jim Harbaugh, he's flirted with the NFL a couple times. Sure. This LSU move wasn't a total shock to everybody who was close to him, as far as looking for a program where he could, sort of break the restrictions of academics and all this other stuff that comes with Notre Dame and just do what he wants and recruit a team that he wants. So that I think that kind of held him back. But I really do think this speaks more to Marcus Freeman and his ability to recruit, which surprises me a lot. I mean, this was a guy who was a, defensive coordinator at Cincinnati. Then he becomes defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. Then, after a year, he's the head coach at Notre Dame. The players love him and the players recruit the kids. And the recruits that are on campus talking to the players are just blown away by the love they have for Freeman.
Yeah, I think the challenge of him, Mike, is can he stack classes, right? I mean, if he wants to build this thing into a powerhouse, can he stack class after class, right? I mean, obviously you're talking early June, here we are, but do you think he has the staying power if they perform on the field, which is the big if with any coach, right? Can he stack classes and sort of get Notre Dame into that perennial top 5, top 3 recruiting class?
Gotta win. I mean, that's what it comes down to in this day and age. The NIL is a factor, of course. South Bend isn't exactly a metropolis, and competing with, places like Miami and LA and Dallas and some bigger markets is difficult. But Notre Dame is such a brand that NIL is not going to be a hindrance for him whatsoever. It's going to come down to winning. He's got 3 commitments in the 2024 class. All 3 of them are, 4-star kids. Carr could be a 5, depending on who you look at. I think he does have that ability, but they got to win football games. And again, the bar is set so high. So there's 2 programs that I think coaches are stepping into where they have no choice but to go backwards. And one is Notre Dame and one is Oklahoma, because you just have to. I mean, to win 10, 11 games at Oklahoma every year, to go to the playoffs multiple times, Brent Venables, the bar is so high that to raise the bar, he has to win 12 games. He has to win a national title. And it's the same at Notre Dame. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a dip on the field for those two programs, including Notre Dame. The difference between Notre Dame and everybody else is, the 40-year decision versus the 4-year decision. Smart kids choosing Notre Dame won't stop. This is a tick up. So this is like a half notch higher than I've ever seen. And if they can continue this with wins on the field, they will win a national championship. I don't think they could do it on the field. So I'm gonna answer that question and say he's gonna string together good classes. This class isn't gonna finish number one, but he's gonna string together top 10 classes as Brian Kelly did, and I think he'll get as far as Brian Kelly did, which is best case scenario: you go to the championship game and you get plowed.
What about other schools, Mike? Is there any other school out there that, maybe flying under the radar that you think is doing a really good job putting together a solid class? Obviously, they're kind of the top programs, but is there anybody you got an eye on that you think is kind of sneaking up the board, maybe a school people wouldn't expect?
Well, it's a little ridiculous right now in June because, 4 of my top 10 teams are not traditional powers. One of them is Michigan State, who is doing a tremendous job, even a better job than Michigan recruiting right now. 11 commitments. I've got like 8 of those guys as 4-star kids. It's very, very impressive what Mel Tunker's doing there. Northwestern, Pat Fitzgerald, they're coming off a horrible year. They've got 18 commitments, so they're higher in anybody's rankings because of those numbers, but they're putting together an extremely good recruiting class with 4 stars, which they're like Notre Dame. It's hard to get them, but they're like Notre Dame without Notre Dame's, tradition and all the pomp and circumstance that comes with Notre Dame. They're Northwestern. So he's doing a great job. Cincinnati, after Fickle brought him to the playoff last year, they've got 20 commitments, which is high, and they will drop in my rankings, but their average star ranking to me is over 3, which is hard for Cincinnati to do, but they're moving to the Big 12 in 2023. That's going to help them. And then Texas Tech. I mean, Joey McGuire is killing it. And it's not unexpected. Joey McGuire is a high school football legend in the state of Texas. He did a tremendous job when he was at Baylor. Now he's taken over a Texas Tech program, but selling Lubbock, that's not easy. So he's really impressing me as well. Now, all this is going to shift out. Ohio State's going to be in the top 5. Alabama is going to be in the top 5. Georgia is going to be in the top 5. Like the usual suspects will be up there. But these 4 classes I mentioned, Texas Tech, Cincinnati, Northwestern and Michigan State will be better than their normal classes, it appears. And that's dangerous. We saw Michigan State close to the playoff run, Cincinnati made it. So watch out for those 4 teams.
Texas Tech is interesting, right? Because obviously the Oklahoma and Texas will stay in the Big 12 for a couple seasons. I mean, the Big 12 will be wide open. You mentioned the additions of UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston. The Big 12 will be wide open. And I'm curious if Texas Tech can stack classes, there will be a mantle to be had as soon as Oklahoma and Texas exit stage right. I don't know if that'll happen before the 25 season. I'm sure lawyers and people smarter than you and I are figuring that stuff out. But does Texas Tech have that opportunity, you think, to take that mantle if and when that new Big 12 finally forms without Texas and Oklahoma?
Well, I love Joey McGuire. I think he's a fun guy. I don't know him that well personally, but I know people have worked with him, and obviously his reputation as a high school coach. And he's a down to earth, funny guy. So I put out a list of the 5 toughest places I feel the 5 toughest places to win in college football are, and Kansas wasn't on that 5, right? Texas Tech was 5th. Vanderbilt's number 1. Duke, the usual suspects. But I had Texas Tech, because Lubbock is just a hard area to recruit to. I mean, it's not, it's not Dallas, it's not Houston. It's sort of like an off the beat Texas location, and there's kids go there, and sometimes they just not a lot to do. So he sent me a message and he said, "Where's Kansas?" It was funny, and then he laughed. And I said, okay, well, I'm flattering you because you're going to win at Texas Tech, and I'm saying how hard it is. So go out and win. He feels confident he can. He's got talent there. This recruiting class is certainly going to help. What you mentioned in the Big 12, there's not going to be an alpha. It's going to be jockeying
Yeah.
for position alpha wise. So he's got a chance. The last time we saw someone win there, obviously, was Mike Leach, and, a guy named Crabtree, and the upset over Texas and all that stuff. And they threw the ball 80 times a game. And then, of course, we saw Patrick Mahomes, have success there, throwing the ball a billion times. It's going to be a little bit different approach with Joey McGuire, and I think they're going to be better defensively. But I still have to be honest. It's a tough place to win, and I just don't know if he's going to be able to get the job done.
Let's. This has been way too positive, Mike. Let's go negative. Who's struggling recruiting wise right now that you're surprised that they haven't been able to put more names on the board? Who's kind of in that bottom tier that has you scratching your head?
I don't. I like Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. I don't like the start they're off to with 5 commitments. I don't like, that they've whiffed a little bit in the transfer portal. I don't like a ton of what Florida's doing so far. They're kind of reaching on a few kids. That's a little surprising to me, but Billy Napier blew that thing up. He went in there and he saw how bad it was under McElwain and then Mullen, and he said, listen, we got to start this over again. We don't care about star rankings or anything. We just want to get players that fit my system. But Florida is a little bit disappointing in their start. Stanford was disappointing last year. They're disappointing this year. And I know they have academic restrictions, but they've finished as high as number 5 in the country. When I was covering them, they have the ability to get great players, and they're just not doing it. So I would put those programs, as sort of a disappointment right now. The others, Alabama's got 4 commitments and they're not ranked high. Who cares? Last year, I remember there was panic in March. In March, they had more decommitments than commitments at Alabama, right? In March, and people were freaking out. And I'm like, just shut up. You have no problem. These are what I call pretty people problems, right? You 5-star problems. You're going to be fine. So people freaking out about teams like Alabama, or LSU. Oh, Brian Kelly's a fish out of water, and they're not off to a great start. They're all going to finish in the top 10, probably top 5 for Alabama, probably top 5 for LSU, perhaps maybe 6th. They're going to be fine. So I wouldn't freak out about any of that stuff. I would freak out, though, a little bit if I'm some of those schools I mentioned earlier, because you just don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's always a fun time. Like, this has been a fun little conversation. Where can people keep up with you? Where can people find your stuff? I know you got a lot of things happening these days. Where can people find you? Give us all the plugs on how to stay connected with the godfather of recruiting.
Yeah, so it's MikeFarrellSports.com. We're putting up probably about 4 or 5 articles a day right now. That'll increase. It's the off season. M Farrell Sports at Twitter. I just put out my top 50 quarterbacks, and that just went. It went as poorly
I saw that.
as they did it. Yeah,
I saw that. Yeah. What's the goal with that? I saw Mikey Keene. I'm not offended by that. He's got to prove some stuff, right? But you got a lot of blowback on that list, did you?
I expect it. I mean, if you rank anything, including 50 football teams, everybody's going to complain. What I find interesting, though, is when I put out lists like that, is where is the complaint going to come from? Like, who's going to be the fan base that rises up and is so upset? And then there's the funny part. There's the Florida fans saying, how dare you disrespect AR-15, Anthony Richardson, and then the other fans who said he threw 6 touchdowns and 5 interceptions last year. He sucks. And then there's the Michigan State fans were upset Peyton Thorne was behind DJ Uiagalelei at Clemson. And I get it. Statistically, he shouldn't be, but this was a part projection. Will Levis at Kentucky being so high was a big thing everybody freaked out about because they think I'm stupid. And then there's the complete morons that don't even look at the list or look at the list very quickly and say, how could you forget Devin Leary? I had 2 morons do that, and he was 4th.
Yeah, he was top 5. Yeah.
So I'm like, come on. I mean, at least peruse before. But what it is to me, it's. I love the opinions. I love to hear. They're all negative, of course. No one's saying what a great list, Mike. But I love to hear. I just like to hear what the fan bases feel and say and listen, this guy should have been on here. How dare you not have touchdown Tommy DeVito transfer from Syracuse to Illinois and that type of stuff. So that the point of the list is not to say I'm perfect and this is right and all you guys suck. It's to sort of see where the feeling is from certain fan bases about their guys. And I'm going to do running back. I'm going to do a billion of them. And it's, to me, the engagement is what I'm after. For years and years, I was engaged on message boards, but they were premium behind the paywall message board. And eventually, I hope to make my site premium and behind a paywall someday. But right now it's free, and Twitter's free, and you can yell at me for free. And I like mixing it up with fans and people that I've never been able to speak to before because I couldn't collaborate with them, like you. I don't know what's out there because I was so living in this little bubble where I was restricted as to what I can do. And now every day is kind of fun. So that's what the website's about. That's what the Twitter, the Instagram's Farrell Sports as well. I'm on TikTok. I'm everywhere. Facebook, you name it. But really, MikeFarrellSports.com. If you want to support, just go to the articles, read the articles, share the articles with your friends, tell people about it. Let's get the traffic up there. Then the sponsors will come. Then the paywall will come. But I promise I'm going to make it very inexpensive. And then we can have some fun with it. And I can bring on more people and produce more content, but right now it's kind of like just for fun.
Well, it's been a lot of fun letting you let me on here tonight, Mike. I appreciate you you hosting with me and giving me an opportunity here. And an untethered Mike Farrell is definitely a good Mike Farrell. So make sure you give him a follow, MikeFarrellSports.com for all your needs. And,
you do a great job, by the way, Adam. You do
thanks,
a really
appreciate you.
I mean, the questions are excellent. There's no hesitation. There's no fumbling. There's no nothing. You really just set it up. And then the most important thing in anybody, I think, who's doing a podcast or interviewing somebody, you got to listen to the other person, because when you listen to the other person, then you can segue into a different topic that wasn't planned, and then that's what you did here. So I think I'm very impressed with you and what you've done. And this is the first time I've ever worked with you or listened to you, but you do a good job.
Well, much like Arch Manning's ceiling, it can only go down from here, Mike. But I appreciate you having me, and hopefully we'll get a chance to collaborate soon. Everybody have a fantastic time. We're signing off, Mike Farrell Sports. We're out of here.